that huge new deal. Fast forward a year, and after several meetings, after several conversations, the determination was made by Ramsey and his people and the Dolphins and their people to move forward and try to seek a trade.
The Miami Dolphins offseason just continues to get worse for them. From their star wide receiver Tyreek Hill posting non-stop tweets implying he wants to be traded, basically since the end of the regular season in January. Then their left tackle Teron Armstead retired, leaving a huge hole on their offensive line, which was already a huge position of need going into the draft. And now the team is very likely to be trading away cornerback Jalen Ramsey, who they literally just extended in September, who is a part of their top 10 defense in 2024, leaving the team in a tough circumstance. We're going to be talking about Jaylen Ramsey and the trade situation going on with the Miami Dolphins. Before I continue though, I would appreciate it if you would take 5 seconds to subscribe to my channel. We're trying to hit 10K this year. Help me reach my goals, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it. So the Miami Dolphins and Jaylen Ramsey mutually agreed that a trade would be best for both sides. Ian Rappaport said right here that the Miami Dolphins and 7-time Pro Bowl cornerback Jalen Ramsey are mutually set to explore trade options, and it would not be a surprise if he played elsewhere in 2025. Miami and Ramsey, who is due $25 million fully guaranteed this season, could be parting ways. Not only was this a report from Ian Rappaport, but Miami Dolphins general manager Chris Grier confirmed this himself, saying, "We decided it was probably in the best interest for all parties to move forward separately." Dolphins general manager Chris Grier also mentioned that Jaylen Ramsey did not request a trade, so this leads me to believe that the Miami Dolphins likely asked Jaylen Ramsey to take a pay cut or redo his contract in some way, shape, or form, and Jaylen Ramsey did not want to do that, especially since he got paid in September. The Miami Dolphins made Jaylen Ramsey the highest paid cornerback in NFL history back in September on a 3-year deal worth $72.3 million to make him the highest paid cornerback in the NFL again. And then that record got broken by whoever JC Horn this offseason. Not only did Chris Grier mention that Jaylen Ramsey did not request a trade and that they're moving apart from each other, but he also brought up Tyreek Hill and the trade speculation going around with him. Now, this isn't really related to Jaylen Ramsey, but I wanted to bring it up because it's been a talking point all offseason. And Chris Grier basically said that it is not anything that we're pursuing in terms of trading Tyreek Hill, but who knows, if someone wants to come and give me 2 first-round picks, we'll consider it. Ain't nobody trading that much shit for Tyreek Hill. I still think he's good, but when you have a guy who's dealing with a whole lot of off-the-field stuff, social media stuff, you know, the personal police stuff that's been going on recently, no one's giving up 2 first-round picks just because you gave up 2 first-round picks for him a few years ago when he was about to hit his prime. But when it comes to the Dolphins situation and Jaylen Ramsey, the Dolphins as of right now have $16 million in cap space, which ranks 24th near the bottom around the NFL. And in 2026, they will have, as of right now, $4.8 million in cap space, which ranks 29th. Now, the reasoning behind the Dolphins having such little cap space is because they went all in on the Mike McDaniel era as a head coach, and they still are, but they're not being as aggressive. The Dolphins gave Teron Armstead a huge contract back in 2022. They gave up a lot of assets to get Tyreek Hill in a trade. Then they signed him to a big contract extension, then gave him more guarantees in 2024. Then last offseason, they gave their quarterback Tua Tagovailoa a big contract extension, which one could argue may or may not have been worth it considering his concussion history, and the fact that they have yet to win a playoff game with Tua because of his limitations in cold weather. The Miami Dolphins also gave wide receiver Jaylen Waddle a pretty nice contract extension as well, while also letting players go in free agency like Jaylen Holland, the safety, one of the better ones in the NFL, and guard Robert Hunt, who went on to sign with the Carolina Panthers. Then of course there's the Jaylen Ramsey trade and extension. And when you look at the drafting the Dolphins have been doing while they're going all in on Mike McDaniel as their head coach, it hasn't been horrible, but it also hasn't been great. Chop Robinson was okay. Jalen Wright was okay. You go to 2023, Devon Achane was a hit, and that's about it for that draft class. I don't know too much about Cam Smith. In 2022, they really didn't hit on any of these picks either. 2021 was a good year for their draft, getting Jalen Waddle, Jalen Phillips, Jaylen Holland, and they drafted Hunter Long, who I believe was used in a trade to get Jalen Ramsey. And then in 2020, they did get Tua Tagovailoa, Robert Hunt. So the drafting as of recently has not been great, but they've had a few solid players drafted since 2020, but it hasn't been where it needs to be since they've been going all in, signing huge contracts and trying to win playoff games. Despite these efforts though, the Dolphins have not won a playoff game in the past 24 years, despite making the playoffs 2 times in the past 3 seasons under Mike McDaniel. Now the moves that the Dolphins made weren't necessarily bad ones, but if you're going to be going all in, you also have to be hitting on draft picks, and your quarterback has to be a franchise QB. And Tua, well, there's a lot of different opinions about him. Now, because of all these moves, they find themselves in a tough cap space situation. This led to the Dolphins having a more so quiet offseason in terms of free agency. They did re-sign Bradley Chubb, but they lost Javon Holland. They did bring in James Daniels at right guards to help out their offensive line. They also brought in Zach Wilson to be the backup to Tua because of Tua's concussion history. They lost Calais Campbell, Robert Jones as well. They signed a few players, but there really isn't any game-changing, game-breaking players here. Just a few solid guys who can contribute, but nothing game-changing in my opinion. Now, when it comes to trading Jalen Ramsey, my personal thoughts are it's not ideal for the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins just had one of the better defenses in the NFL after moving on from defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, who played a huge role in the Eagles' Super Bowl run. Statistically, the Dolphins had a top 10 defense in passing and rushing, in touchdowns allowed and points allowed. Even though it probably didn't feel like it for Dolphin fans, the defense was actually pretty solid. The biggest issue for them was their turnover differential. They weren't a defense that created a lot of turnovers. But on top of that, it likely didn't help that the offense was not putting up a lot of points considering the fact that their quarterback was out. Still though, the Dolphins had a good defense and Jalen Ramsey was a part of that, putting up 2 interceptions, 11 pass breakups, and had 6 tackles for a loss in 2024. Jalen Ramsey, of course, is not the player that he once was, but in my opinion, based off the film and stuff, I still think he's a pretty good player. Maybe not a number 1 corner, but a pretty good number 2 guy. Jalen Ramsey is turning 31 years old in October, and corners at the age of 30 become risky because, well, they're not as athletic as they used to be, and backpedaling, running backwards, turning the hips becomes a lot harder when you're less athletic than you were years ago. But Jalen Ramsey's still a good player. Like I said, he's probably just a number 2 corner, which is why trading Jalen Ramsey does not make a whole lot of sense for the Miami Dolphins unless it is really about the money and they can't afford to keep him. But then what was the point of giving him a huge contract extension in September if you knew that you're going to be having money problems in the offseason? Going into the draft, cornerback is on the list of needs for the Miami Dolphins, and we are 1 week away. And trading Jalen Ramsey would only increase that need for the Dolphins. But with the 13th overall pick, they could get a guy like Will Johnson or Jahdae Barron out of Texas for cheaper and younger than Jalen Ramsey. But why try to replace him when you can just pair the two together? Like I said, on the field stuff, that would make a whole lot of sense, but I think it's really about the money here. They lost their safety Javon Holland to the Giants in free agency, so the secondary was going to be declining a little bit regardless. And now trading away Jalen Ramsey will only decline the defense even more when you could ultimately just draft a cornerback and team him up with Ramsey in the secondary. Finding a trade partner, I'm assuming, should not take that long. It won't be hard for the Miami Dolphins. Teams can never have too many good corners in the NFL, and with the name alone, Jalen Ramsey, there's going to be teams interested, likely teams closer to being contenders than not. When it comes to the compensation, it's likely not going to be anything crazy. I'm assuming a little bit less than the Marshawn Lattimore trade for the Saints and Commanders, which ended up being a 3rd round pick, a 4th round pick, and a 6th round pick. I'm assuming Jalen Ramsey will likely be like a 4th round pick and maybe like a player or something like that. Maybe throw in a 6th round pick. But I'm not expecting him to go for anything crazy. Which is why it would make sense for a team close to competing for a Super Bowl would trade for him. A team like the Cincinnati Bengals could make sense. They need a cornerback. They need to improve their defense, but they're cheap. And do they really want to give up assets in a trade for Ramsey when they could possibly draft one? I'm not too sure. The Baltimore Ravens could be a team that fits the criteria for trading for Jalen Ramsey. The 49ers, even though they're kind of rebuilding, I'm curious if that's a guy who they would want to go all in on. After losing Chardavius Ward this offseason, the Detroit Lions could be a team interested. The Washington Commanders could be a team that becomes interested. And I'm a Saints fan, obviously, if you couldn't tell, and I'm just going to throw this out there. Could the Saints possibly be interested in Jalen Ramsey? There's the Brandon Staley connection, who is now the Saints defensive coordinator under head coach Kellen Moore. Jalen Ramsey tweeted this out when Brandon Staley got hired by the New Orleans Saints. Said, my guy, super excited. And there's a quote from Jalen Ramsey from back in 2021 saying that Brandon Staley is the best defensive coordinator that he's ever had for sure in the NFL. So if he's getting traded and he has a preference of where he gets traded, could he go to the Saints? The fit makes sense. The situation makes sense. The Saints need a cornerback. But when it comes to the contract and the salary cap and the cap space, it doesn't make any sense. And I hope the Saints don't do it, but it's definitely a talking point for sure. You can't just dismiss it. With the NFL draft, though, just a week away, it may add pressure to get a deal done with a trade for Jalen Ramsey, not only for the Dolphins to get an additional draft pick or such, but for teams in the NFL looking for a cornerback, they could get their answer in Jalen Ramsey as opposed to drafting one. Let me know where you think Jalen Ramsey is going to get traded, or if he gets traded at all. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll catch you next time. Have a good one. Peace.